Hi, I'm Ron. Thanks for checking this out. It's been a little longer between videos than I intended, but we'll talk about that another time. I have a really cool flute to share with you today, and that's what we are going to talk about. This is in high C. Now, we usually work on a medium A flute here, so if you happen to have a C flute, it doesn't matter whether it's high or low for what we're doing today, go grab it. Now, this lovely little flute I've had a long history with, actually. It was made by Dusty Moore from Tsunami Flutes back in the early 2000s, I think. I've had it since about 2001, 2002. As I said, it's in high C, and it's a very, very beautiful curly maple. And I think it's black walnut block and highlights, but a very nice flute. Now, I had this flute for several years and enjoyed playing it, and then my dad got interested in playing some higher key flutes, so I gifted it to him, and he enjoyed playing it for many, many years. You may or may not know he passed about 2 years ago, and while I was visiting my stepmother this summer, she decided it was time for the flute to come home with me, and so here it is. And after COVID, which is why it's been so long between videos, just getting some energy back, I got reacquainted with this flute, and I'd like to tell you some things about it because it's very, very cool flute. For our purposes today, what is most interesting about this flute is that it has 5 finger holes instead of 6. We always work on a 6-hole flute here, so I thought it might be interesting to take a look at 5-hole flutes. If I remember right, Dusty made nothing but 5-hole flutes, at least back when I knew him. Unfortunately, I've completely lost track of Dusty. I hope he's doing well wherever he is, having a good time. He's very good people. So what I have here for comparison, we always use Colin Peterson flutes here, and I do have a Colin Peterson flute that is in high C. So these flutes are in the same key, but as you can see, the Colin Peterson flute, like all of my Colin Peterson flutes, has 6 holes. Right? And if I lay these out side by side, cutting edge, look at the functional length of these flutes, you can see that they're about the same length. The functional length of the Dusty Moore is about here at this line on the Colin flute, and of course the functional length on Colin's flute is right where this hole is. And you can see that the finger holes are actually spaced differently here. The Dusty Moore flute, the finger holes are a little bit further apart, and that's because, I don't know if you can see here, but you can see that the Colin Peterson flute has a wider bore. And so as a result, his finger holes are closer together. But they're both very, very comfortable flutes to play. And you can see, maybe put these back up here, you can see which of the 6 holes on the Colin Peterson flute is not included on the 5-hole flute. It is, in fact, that ring finger on the top hand that we leave down all the time when we play basic scale, or what I like to call beginner mode, because we can actually play so many different modes on our flutes. So we might think then that since that hole's kind of permanently covered, that in order to play beginner mode or basic scale, all we have to do is walk right up the flute. And that is exactly true. Let me show you. Let me see if I can get to where you can see my fingers a little bit. Right, you also got a nice demonstration of why I'm always telling you to keep your fingers close to the holes, right? Because you'll splash some of the holes trying to get back otherwise. All right, but you can see then that to play basic scale, I don't even have to bother about keeping this finger down on this flute. That hole's covered up all the time. Now, because of that, I often hear an unfortunate stereotype about 5-hole flutes that all they can do is play that minor pentatonic mode. Now, if you've seen my videos before, you know what I think about that notion about just about any flute. And just because that finger hole is covered doesn't mean we can't get the outside notes. Especially at the bottom of the range, that finger hole's covered all the time anyway. So that note that I like so much, this one on a 6-hole flute, is going to be the same fingering on this 5-hole flute, right? So here's the first 2 notes of basic scale. And here's that alternate fingering that will give me a slightly wider interval at the bottom for those of you who are musicians, a major third instead of a minor third. I should say those of you who know jargon from Western classical music, just because you don't know that jargon does not mean you are not a musician. So, yeah, sorry, I didn't, I misspoke there. All right, but in any case, I can get that note very easily on this 5-hole flute, right? The other outside note that we enjoy a lot at the bottom of the range, also the fingering is going to be exactly the same. I'll show you. All right, so when I get to here on my 5-hole flute, it's the equivalent of being here on my 6-hole flute with that ring finger hole covered. Now, when I get to upper register on the 5-hole flute, again, the fingerings are going to be the same because usually we'll keep that finger covered, that hole covered in the upper register. So upper register is not a problem here. Now, for that very, very top note, I find it helpful to cover this to get it to speak. But once I'm there, I can usually let go of it. You can hear that it actually pulls the pitch up slightly if I let go of that. So you can play with half-holing it to fully venting it to get that pitch to go up if you needed to. So that's lower register and upper register taken care of, right? The little bit of a tricky part comes here, right? On my 6-hole flute, let me grab my Colin Peterson flute. If we're talking about the fingering system that I usually use, I call this fingering 4 going to fingering 5, right? Depending on what system you're using, some people would call this fingering 3 going to fingering 2. Or if you're reading Nakai tab, it's written C sharp going to E, right? And I'll put a keyboard up here, a picture of a keyboard up here, and you can see that the distance between those two pitches is 2 piano keys. We're skipping over 2 piano keys. And we have fingerings on our 6-hole flute to fill in the space, right? Here's that basic scale interval. And if I want to fill in part of that space, here's a fingering that'll help do that. Right? In Nakai tab, that would be a written D sharp. And on our 6-hole flutes, we have an alternate fingering that will do something of the same thing, and that is to release this guy, to vent that hole. Now, on some flutes, this fingering and this fingering sound almost the same, but on some flutes, they're quite different. You can hear that on this flute, they're pretty similar, just a little microtone difference between the two, a little bit difference in color. But it's nice to have that alternate fingering, right? Depending on the melodic line, one fingering or the other might be easier to use, depending on who you're making music with or what your melody wants to do. One sound or the other might be preferable. Now, on my 5-hole flute, I can get that note as well, and I can get it the same way as I got it on my 6-hole flute. Remember that first fingering had this hole covered. Well, this hole is permanently covered here, all right? So on a 6-hole flute, it looks like this, but I don't have to have this finger here on my 5-hole flute because it's permanently covered, right? So basic scale, remember this is like having the 3 bottom holes on my 6-hole flute uncovered. Right, but this one now is permanently covered. So that's the space we're trying to fill in. This fingering that I'm bringing over directly from 6-hole flute will do the job. You can hear that sounds very similar to what I was doing on my 6-hole flute. Now, this is no longer an alternate fingering, though, on the 5-hole flute. On the 6-hole flute, this worked as an alternate fingering for this. Right? On this flute, it won't, because this hole can't be uncovered. Right? So that's an alternate fingering that we have available on the 6-hole flute that is not available on the 5-hole flute. And the other note that we often use to fill in that space, we might intuitively think is, wow, virtually impossible on the 5-hole flute, because here's what we do a lot of times. Right, in Nakai tab, that is written D natural, right? And if you're using your trained ears, it's a half step above this pitch. It's just a half step up and then back. And you can see that it involves venting this hole. Well, I can't do that on my 5-hole flute. So does that mean that that note is not playable? In fact, no, it does not mean that. It's a very, very cool thing here. All right, listen to this. Same sound, half a step apart. Now, what am I doing to get that? Well, sometimes on our nice open hole flutes, we can add more fingers underneath to make the note go down. Right? So I'm filling in this gap. And if I put just my index finger down, I'm covering the 3rd hole from the bottom using my index finger of my lower hand. That pulls the pitch down a half step to written D sharp in Nakai tab. And if I add another finger, it will pull it down another half step. And now I've filled in, at least in terms of Western music theory, I have filled in that gap, right? All right, so indeed, the 5-hole flute can play every single interval that my 6-hole flute can play. I maybe don't have as many alternate fingering options, but it can do everything that the 6-hole flute can do. In fact, that makes me wonder that if I go back to my 6-hole flute, right, can I use that same fingering to fill in the gap? Right? There's our gap. You can hear that the note gets a little bit fussy. If I put too much air on it, it wants to crack a little bit, but it's there, right? So my 5-hole flute has provided me with yet another alternate fingering that I can use on my 6-hole flute. And with that alternate fingering, in fact, I don't ever have to lift this guy if I don't want to, right? Listen. A lovely little chromatic scale gesture, just going from one key to the next on the keyboard, and it becomes very, very easy to play if I use this fingering along the way. All right? So, what does this tell us about how many holes we should have in our flutes? Well, we do have some extra alternate fingerings with the 6-hole flute that are not available on the 5-hole flute, and I do find this hole very useful in upper register for microtuning. I can kind of partially vent that hole and pull the pitch up a little bit if I need to. So it's nice to have those extra alternative fingerings and tuning options, depending on what your melody's doing, depending on who you're playing with, how you want to fit in with what's going on around you. It's nice to have options. But you don't have to feel like a 5-hole flute is going to limit you at all. And that really gets me to the big takeaway for today. Doesn't really matter whether your flute has 5 holes, 6 holes, 4 holes, 8 holes, doesn't really matter. What does matter is that you take the time and the energy to explore the full musical capabilities of your flute. We often sell our Native American flutes short. We attach stereotypes to them that are often attached to a lot of other things about indigenous culture, at least in the Americas, that it's simple, it's primitive, so you just can't do all very much with these flutes. It's something you'll hear from me constantly because I've lived it, and I think you can too. Our flutes are as musically flexible and expressive and versatile as any other instrument on the planet. You just have to take the time and the energy to learn the full capabilities of the instrument. So my nice little flute that came home to me this summer reminded me of an extra fingering that I haven't even been using on my 6-hole flute. It taught me something new almost immediately as soon as it got home. So maybe a good way to start each of your practice sessions is to think, what will my flute teach me today? Now, I actually had some other things I wanted to talk about along with this today, but it would have made the video way too long. So I'm going to shut it down here for now, and I'll try to get the other 2 videos, shorter videos, up for you in the next week or 2. In the meantime, enjoy exploring your flute, and I'll see you next time.